Hey, what's up you guys? It's Sarah from Not So Design Co. and I'm here today to give you a step-by-step tutorial on how you can make your very own propagation station using Crafted Elements' new propagation mold.
Before we get started, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you check out the rest of Crafted Elements' tutorials. For today's project, we'll be preserving some dried florals, but before I begin, I like to go in with some tape just to make sure that the mold is completely clean. I then go in and spray mold release all over the mold. This will make your silicone mold last longer, and it also prevents the resin from sticking. While you're waiting for your mold release to dry, it's time to prep yourself. Proper PPE when you're working with resin is essential, so that means pulling your hair back, wearing a respirator mask, and putting on some gloves. Okay, now that our mold and ourselves are completely ready, it's time to mix up the resin. I'm using a deep pour resin that is good to pour up to 2 to 3 inches in depth, which is what you'll want to use for a project like this since this is such a deep mold. You'll want to mix your resin until it's completely clear, and then I'm just laying down a nice base layer in which I'm going to start putting all the dried florals in. A little trick that sometimes I do to prevent air bubbles from these big roses is just completely submerging them in the resin before I put them into the mold. I poured about an inch of resin into this mold already, and then I'm just laying all the dried florals on top of that resin. After I have the design completely how I want it, I will go back in and put another thin layer of resin on top of it. Okay, now that our design is the way we want it, I'm going back in with that leftover resin, and I'm just going to cover the rest of the flowers and fill the mold up a little bit more. I ended up doing 3 layers in this project just because I wanted the florals to stay in the top and middle of the resin and not float up too much. Since we are using a deep pour resin, any large bubbles that you see will eventually make its way to the top, and then you can just go in behind and spray some alcohol on top and that will pop them. I let this first layer of resin cure for a little over 24 hours, and here I am the next day. I mixed up another big batch of deep pour resin, and I'm just going in and filling in that second layer, and I fill it all the way up to where the propagation tubes are going to rest. We're going to let the second layer also cure for about 24 hours and come back tomorrow to do our final layer. Okay, the first 2 layers are completely cured, so here I am mixing up a batch of white resin. I decided to do a bottom layer of white just to add some contrast. And then I'm just going to let this cure for about 24 to 48 hours, and then I'll come back and do the unmolding. One of my favorite things about Crafted Elements molds are how easy they are to demold. I just started by pulling away the sides and then popped one side out, and then it just slipped right out of the mold with barely any effort. Now it's time to do some finishing steps. I personally like to sand the corners of the molds just to get that rough edge off and to make sure it won't scratch any surfaces. Okay, time for the reveal. This stand allows you to use 5 propagation tubes. After I filled the test tubes up with water, I already had some pothos trimmings sitting in a glass jar, so I went ahead and moved them over. The purpose of a propagation station is to do little seedling plants, put them in water, let them grow roots, and then you can grow a new plant. But this mold is so versatile that you could also buy different size test tubes with different heights and use them to display dried flowers. But that's a wrap, guys. I love how this piece turned out. Thank you so much to Crafted Elements for having the highest quality molds. You can go buy your own propagation station at craftedelements.com. And once again, I'm Sarah from Not So Design Co. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel as well as Crafted Elements so you don't miss out on any future videos.